My name is Glenn Melancon. I am a history professor. My wife and I, Jackie, moved to Sherman in 1995. I finished a PhD from LSU in history and have two young boys, Christopher and Alexander. My oldest son, Christopher, is 17 years old. He's a junior in Sherman High School. And I've learned to appreciate the great public schools we have here in Texas, and especially the great opportunities that they have to grow and experience leadership positions. My son's in the band, and we just spent the last week in San Antonio at the state band contest, and they were in the top 10. People ask, why do you do this? Why do you put yourself up for public office? And why do you run? And my answer is real simple. It's the same reason you're here, because I'm an American, and I have the responsibility to lead and to do what's right. Our country was built on the principle that we, the people of the United States of America, will form a more perfect union. So when we see things that aren't right, great Americans in the past have always stepped up and handed on this country to the next generation in better shape than they got it. But if we look at what's happened over the last 8 years, can we honestly say to ourselves that the behavior of Washington politicians are things that we can be proud of? And in 20 years, when we look back and tell our kids, did we do everything we could to change direction? And I couldn't sit home and say to myself that I was doing everything until you had a voice. Someone who would go out there and express your values, your needs, and know that we have done everything to fight for an America that stands up for every American. And so I agree with Tom. I said, one of the key essential platform or programs that we've got to have in America is stem cell research, for one simple reason. Without stem cell research, I don't think we could ever give the Washington politician the spine they need to stand up to corporations and fight for you. It's that simple. When you know what's right, it's easy to do the right thing. And I'm very proud to stand up here as a Democrat, because I know the Democratic Party has been the party of progress for the last 100 years. The party that has brought national parks, food safety, water quality, Social Security, Medicare, all of the things that are necessary to improve the quality of life of your average American. Every time that the voters demanded it, the Republican Party over the last 120 years has stood in the way and said no. They've been extremists, just like Tom has pointed out, for Sam Johnson, Ralph Hall, Mr. Cornyn. They have been the party of the extreme corporate special interest and taken care of the privileged few. And every time they've done it, they've made a very simple temptation. They told your average voter, if you turn your back on your neighbor, you can have wealth. If you turn your back on your neighbor, you can have glory. If you turn your back on your neighbor, you can have power. Now that's a very ancient temptation, but it is a temptation that is destroying the very fabric of our lives and tearing down our communities. And it is up to us to take a step back and say, wait a minute, when have we been stronger? When have we been prouder? When have we been more secure? And the answer is real simple. When we look after our neighbors, when we treat our neighbors as ourselves, when we put the interest of community above all else, that we are Americans, that we will fight to create a more perfect union. And when we've done that, we have been that city on a hill. We have been a beacon for the world to follow and to look after. There was no talk when I was growing up as a child about whether America was respected or not around the world. There was no question that as an American living in Europe, because my dad was serving this country, there was no question that I was an American. And people looked at me in awe and said, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for what you've done. There was no question that America stood up against tyranny and torture and stood up for human rights. It's only within the last 8 years that you've had a few corporate special interests who have tried to twist our patriotism, twist our values, and say, we'll talk about family values, but they've done nothing to protect your family. They've taken our patriotism and turned it into record oil profits and Iraq into a nightmare. They've talked about the right things, but they have never delivered. And they've been miserable failures each and every time. Why? Because they've started from a very wicked temptation that greed is good. I'm here to tell you greed is not good. Greed is not a family value. Greed is not an American value. Americans do best when we put our neighbors first.